Hey guys, welcome to Scare Theater, and here is another episode of the CreepyPasta Thoughts, where I just talk about creepypastas. Now, in the last episode of this, when I talked about Arizona, I asked you guys to leave some creepypastas in the comments for me to review and whatnot, and I can't think of a user named CLOK requested that I talk about Penpal. Now, before I start the review, I want to say something. So, the way that I edited the last Creepypasta Thoughts video and the way this one will be edited is just by adding some, just a couple of pictures, in this probably around 6, and then just having those pictures just kind of show up on the screen throughout the video. So would you rather I edit the Creepypasta Thoughts videos this way, or would you rather me edit these the way that I edit most of the other videos? Just let me know in the comments. So anyways, Penpal was a really long story, and I mean, so long to the point where I can't really summarize it. I was going to give a summary of it, but then I realized how long the story was, and I'm like, I can't really summarize this. So I really do recommend that you do read the story before watching this video, because it was a really good story. But the most of a summary that I can really give of the story is that pretty much it's about the author who is kind of reflecting upon his childhood memories, and as he's reflecting upon some of these stuff, he's just really focusing on some of the really weird, strange stuff that happened in his childhood. And as you read it, it actually does get really creepy. Now, the way that I initially was going to read the story, because I was actually kind of intimidated by how big it was. So the way I originally thought I was going to read it was, because it's split up into 6 parts, which are footsteps, balloons, boxes, maps, screens, and friends. So I initially thought that I would just read the first part of the story, then take a break, then come back and read the second part of the story, then take a break, and then so on and so forth, and go about it like that. But after I read the first part of the story, I was like, you know what, this is pretty interesting, so I kept on reading on to balloons, and I just kept on reading on until I read until I read 3 parts of the story. Then my eyes just got tired and I took a break, then I read the last 3 parts. But the point I'm trying to make there is that even though the story is really long, it's one of those stories that once you start reading it, you can't stop. Which for me, a lot of stories that are really long like this don't have that type of effect on me. But yeah, I promise, once you start reading this, you won't want to stop. It's really interesting. In addition to it being interesting, I thought the story was really realistic. A lot of times in a creepypasta, the way the characters will react is kind of you'll look at it and you'll say, okay, really, that doesn't make much sense. Would anyone have really done something like that in real life? Or, just something along those lines will happen and you'll think there's no way this could have actually happened. But throughout this entire story, I felt there was an explanation as to why everything happened, and the way the characters reacted to things really were like someone would have reacted to a situation in real life, it seems. So it really gave the effect that something like this really could have happened. If this story were presented to me, for the most part, as a true story, then I would definitely believe them. Now there are a couple things in the story that you can look at and say, okay, that did not actually happen. But for the most part, if this was presented to me as a true story, I would definitely believe most of it. Now, another thing that comes along with the realisticness of the characters is the character development itself. Now, I understand that a lot of other stories can't really have as well character development as this one did, because a lot of other creepypastas are a lot shorter than this one was. But I thought that the way the author did the character development here, each character I felt had their own personality, and I could legitimately feel for the characters. This really brings me into something where this story has literally affected me in a way no other story has ever affected me. I thought this was extremely immersive. How sometimes when you're watching a movie, man, something scary is happening in the movie, and you'll feel like you're actually there in the movie, kind of, and you have to pull yourself back to reality. This story did that. It didn't flat out terrify me, but I literally, when something scary was happening in the story, I could feel the suspense building up, I was actually there. And especially at the end, because the story ends. The ending of the story is really tragic. It ends on a really depressing note, and at the end, I felt almost as if I could feel the sadness that the main character was feeling. I don't know, the emotional attachment the story had was really cool. This story really has affected me in a way that no other creepypasta ever has. Honestly, this is probably my favorite creepypasta. I thought it was almost flawless. Now, speaking of flaws, the only 2 flaws that I could really pick out of the story, if anything, were that the story was not written in chronological order, and because of that, it was kind of hard for me to find out which time period some of the stuff was in. For example, at some parts in the story, the author would be 6 years old, then at another part he'd be 15 years old, and then sometimes it would revert to the present. So sometimes I was a little bit confused about which time period the story was taking place at, but other than that, it was still pretty easy to get back on track, and it didn't really affect the readability of the story. Now then, the one thing that I consider a bigger flaw than what I just said was there was this one character in the story named Mrs. Maggie, which was an old lady that lived next to him at one point with Alzheimer's, and at one point in the story she does get killed by the Penpal guy. But the reason why I didn't understand this, I mean, I felt her character was just really pointless. Like, she was just kind of put in there, but other than that, her character didn't come into play anywhere else. She didn't have any major role in the story, so I was like, what was even the point of putting her in? I felt like she was just kind of thrown in there with no real purpose other than to get killed. So that was really it. Other than that, I honestly thought the story was nearly flawless. I thought it was really good. I would definitely rate this a 10 out of 10. Definitely. Honestly, if you guys haven't read this, please read it, because this was actually requested to me on my other channel, and I never actually read it before until now, and I'm really glad I did. This is definitely my favorite creepypasta. Seriously, you need to read this. I give it a 10 out of 10. And that is it, guys. I will see you on the flip side.